Yate Bene. Good morning, my relatives. It's Mark Charles. It is just before noon here in Washington, D.C., so I can just say Yate Bene. But I'm sitting down to my second cup of coffee, and I wanted to just talk about a few things going on both in D.C. as well as around the nation today. So I welcome you to grab your cup and let's hang out for a little bit. So before I begin, let me just do like I always do, and this is important. A lot of people may think this sounds repetitive, or maybe it becomes meaningless after doing it so often. But I do this very intentionally, which is a land acknowledgement everywhere I go, wherever I speak, and I do that because we are told so often by so many different ways that this land belongs to the United States and the native sovereignty, native history, native peoples have been erased or cleansed, ethnically cleansed from these lands. And so we need to remind ourselves daily that there is a different history. And so this is why I begin every single one of my cups of coffee, almost all of my public presentations, wherever I go, wherever I speak, I start by acknowledging the people whose land I'm on. And so I want to acknowledge that even though where I live today is now called Washington, D.C., these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the land where I live. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state how humbled I am that I'm living on these lands today. So there's a few things I wanted to talk about this morning, and let me go to my chat. I see Mary is on. Yate Abine. Good morning, Mary. Thanks for joining. There's a few things I wanted to talk about today as I'm sipping my coffee. And if you follow me on social media, you probably saw me tweet about this, but out of my commitment I talked about yesterday to putter around and to just kind of do things that give me energy and give me life, I decided that every morning after I dropped my daughters off at school, I was going to do something I enjoyed doing. And so this morning I drove by the U.S. Capitol and I spent a little bit of time there. We're going to talk some more later about the dysfunctionality of the U.S. Capitol right now. But this morning I went to the U.S. Capitol, and this is one of my favorite places to sit. I love going by the reflection pool. It's right near here that we read the apology back in 2012, and ever since then, that space in front of the U.S. Capitol, across from the reflection pool, has always been close to my heart. And so I feel very comfortable and at peace there. And so I went there, and one of the things I like about that area is there's ducks in this reflection pool, and I love just kind of watching and filming the ducks there. Completely oblivious, right, to the chaos that's going on in the building right behind them. But sometimes living in DC, I feel like these ducks, where we're in the middle of this very picturesque focal point of the world, even the globe, and yet we're kind of oblivious to it as all this chaos is going on around us. Also, just kind of a point of interest, you've all seen and heard about the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree. Well, today they were taking it down. So I got a picture of them taking the tree down in front of the U.S. Capitol today. And then I went to one of my favorite coffee shops. I haven't been there in a long time, but it's Ebenezer's Coffee House. It's on F Street, right near the Capitol, not too far, just a short walk from there, and very close to Union Station. It's a place where I would hang out there a lot before COVID. I would write there. I would just go there and sit, and frequently I would see people I knew. So I went there this morning. It was warm enough I could sit outside this morning and drink a cup of coffee. Actually, it's the same cup I'm still drinking right now. I keep it in that thermos type cup to keep it warm. But I was able to sit there and just kind of hang out. So I'm actually drinking some Ebenezer's coffee this morning and enjoying that. But it was just a good way to kind of spend some time this morning to get out a little bit. Remember, I'm in this very big city, and just be out and around and kind of sit and enjoy my morning before I came back to work on the second cup of coffee. But anyway, one of the things I want to talk about, and we mentioned this yesterday, was right now the Republican Party is in the process of electing the Speaker of the House. And so the Speaker of the House is elected every new Congress, and the Speaker of the House is actually third in line for the presidency. And to win the speakership, you have to win the vote of the entire House, not just your party. And so the magic number to win that election this year is 218. And the Republican Party has a very thin majority, only by four members. And so one of the reasons why this thing with the representative from New York who lied during his campaign about his education and work and family history is so important is because he flipped one of the seats in the House and was elected as a Republican. And so McCarthy and almost all the other leaders of the Republican Party have been very silent about Representative Santos's his drama, because again, having him under investigation and even potentially removed from the House would only narrow their majority. And so that's one of the reasons that's such a big deal. But anyway, the number to get their senator elected, or their senator, the Speaker of the House elected, is 218, I think is the number. And they missed it. McCarthy, there were 3 votes yesterday. It was the first time in 100 years that there were 3 votes, more than 1 vote, to elect the Speaker of the House. And he vowed he would go vote after vote after vote until he won. And he did 3 votes. And on the 3rd vote, he actually lost by a greater margin than the first 2. He lost the first 2 by 19 votes. He lost the 3rd one by 20 votes. And so there's more of his party members who are flipping to the other side. The Democrats are voting all in unison for their current leader. I forget his name, but they voted for him unanimously. And so their leader actually got more votes than the Republicans, but because they don't have a majority either, they don't get to elect their leader either. So it's a mess. Right. So we're now going into a second day of both campaigning by McCarthy and voting by the House to elect a leader. And it's chaos. It literally is chaos. Not only because we don't have this leader in place, but because there's so much infighting within the Republican Party themselves. And it's interesting to watch the Democrats kind of stand back and, there's all these stories about Democrats, chastising the Republicans and telling them to get their act together. Although we need to remember it was literally just the last term that the Democrats had so much trouble in the Senate, because they had a tied Senate with Vice President Harris holding the tie-breaking vote. And so they were held hostage, if you will, by 2 of their senators, Democratic senators, who were constantly inserting themselves and withholding their vote in support of Democratic policies because they wanted things their way. And so, right, the Democrats did this last year, and now the Republicans are doing it this year. And so don't buy into the narrative that this is a GOP problem. The GOP is currently having the problem, but this is a problem with our hyper-partisan, very extreme view of politics today anyway, where it's all about being an obstructionist. And so don't let the Democrats tell you that this is merely a Republican problem. This is a bipartisan problem. It's just so that today the Republicans are in the headlines, whereas yesterday and a few days before, figuratively speaking, the Democrats were in the headlines for their inability to get things together and be cohesive, even as a party, let alone as a nation. So that's one of the things that's going on. There will be, I followed this story very closely, even though McCarthy has vowed to continue to hold votes until he wins. It looks like he's going the opposite way, and he's losing votes rather than gaining votes, and he's already conceded a whole lot. And so it's almost gotten pointless of holding more votes because it's become a public embarrassment. And so they're supposed to reconvene right now at noon today. They could reconvene and vote to postpone another election until tomorrow, or they may try to vote again and see if he can make enough concessions to win over the very conservative members of his caucus who are holding up his election right now. Anyway, until the Republicans figure it out, we're not going to be able. They can't even swear in the new members because they need to have the leadership in place in order to do that, and they don't have that in place yet. So anyway, we'll see what happens today, and we'll see what happens in the next few days. It will be an interesting story. Second, the thing I wanted to talk about, and this is a story I've actually been following this out of Southern California. I think it was Manhattan Beach, where this was decades ago. There was a black family that owned a beach house, and they created kind of a private beach for uh, black people. This was in the 1920s. Actually, it was they bought this property. They bought beachfront property in Southern California, and it was seized in 1924 by local officials, and they said they had to take it for a public park, and then the land sat vacant for decades, and the family fought to get the land back, and the land was finally returned to them 3 years ago because of the unjust way it was taken from them for a minimal amount of money almost 100 years ago. And the story today out of the New York Times, I saw this, was that the family sold that land back to the county for $20 million. So it was returned to them a few years ago, and they sold it back. And I was curious why they sold it back. And it turns out it was sold back because the property was zoned only for public use. It couldn't be private property. And so they couldn't really do anything with the land. And so their only option was to sell the land and take the money from it. And so they had it appraised, and it appraised at $20 million. And the county agreed to purchase the land back, even though they had just given it to them. And so the article talked about how this was a great example of reparations, right? Because the family had this unjust thing happen to them 100 years ago. The land was returned, and they were now able to sell the land back, even to the same people who took it from them, and profit $20 million, which they could now invest in other things elsewhere outside of that city or outside of that piece of property. And the article, one of the points of the article was that this was a great example of reparations. And that got me thinking a little bit, because I don't disagree. It is an example of reparations. Something unjust was taken, it was returned, and there was a financial benefit, almost a payment, if you will, of that land, for that injustice, that helped make it right for the family. And by and large, yes, that is what reparations is about. But what it got me thinking about is the challenge that as Native peoples we face when we seek justice for the injustices done against us hundreds of years ago. And the difference between what we're seeking and what most other marginalized people are seeking. The difference is we are seeking sovereignty. Sorry, my camera blacked out there for a minute. We are seeking sovereignty. And that's a problem because of the doctrine of discovery. right? This is where we go back to the whole issue. And I want to share this story with you. This was in Native News Online this morning. It was an issue of unmarked graves, and there was a bill in the New York state regarding the protection of unmarked graves. So basically, if they found an unmarked grave that might hold human remains of a native tribe on private land, there was no law about what could be done, what should be done about that. And so there was a law before the state of New York, and it got passed, but it was vetoed by their governor. And when you look at the article and why they vetoed it, one of the reasons they vetoed it is because they felt that the law would be dangerous and could cause harm to private landowners, right? One of the quotes by Governor Hochul, who vetoed the bill, said it was vetoed because the law fails to balance the right of property owners with the interests of the families of lineal descendants of other groups, she wrote into her veto memo. And right, this is the challenge. So these native nations were illegally removed from these lands, and their people were killed and buried on these lands. And they were removed so that white settlement could come in and the land could be privatized and could be owned, and the sovereignty of the U.S. government could extend over it. And now, as these native nations are fighting for the right to even offer some protection for those burial sites, today the governor is vetoing laws saying no, because this is putting your interests above the interests of private landowners. And this is so again, it's the whole issue of sovereignty, right? And weighing the sovereignty of native peoples against the rights of the U.S. government and the rights of non-native settlement on these lands. In fact, the whole issue of sovereignty comes up time and time and time again. And it reminded me of this story, which I've talked about before, but right, when the U.S. government illegally stole the Black Hills from the Lakota Nation, and then they carved the faces of their most genocidal presidents, specifically Abraham Lincoln, into this hill. And later they felt bad and said, we shouldn't have done that. And they offered to pay the Lakota people for these hills. And the Lakota people refused. And today there is $1.5 billion, billion with a B, sitting in a trust fund that the Lakota people refuse to touch because they are adamant that their hills, the Black Hills, are not for sale. They're not for sale. And so that reparations just sits there. Because what the Lakota people are saying is reparations, which is give the hills back to us, is not what is going to happen. And even if, again, it's not just like giving this land back so they can resell it because it can't be used for anything else today. They want to extend their traditional sovereignty over it. And this is right. This is where the doctrine of discovery is so embedded into not only the psyche of America, but into even what we understand and see as just. That when the rights of Native nations and Native peoples bumps up against that, it hits this almost impenetrable wall that you can't get through. Right? The United States of America would love it if they could just write a check to Native peoples. Here, let us pay for our past genocide and ethnic cleansing and stealing of land. But that's not what Native peoples are fighting for. Native peoples are fighting for sovereignty. They're fighting for the right to have their lands back and have rights over their lands again. And the U.S. has no interest in doing that, which is why we're domestic dependent, which is why Our lands are held in trust, which is why the doctrine of discovery is buried and no one wants to talk about it. So these are the challenges that we face. And while I'm very glad to hear that this family got reparations, this African American family got reparations from the city of Huntington Beach, it highlights the challenge that Native peoples face as we seek justice for the injustice enacted against us. The last thing I wanted to talk about a little bit today. Hey, Terry Yatte, hey, thanks for joining this morning. I just saw your comment. Glad you could join this morning. There's a few more people on here. Jordan Lott, Yatte, hey, Jordan. Thanks for joining me for a second cup of coffee. Glad you could join. You're asking about running for president again. I have not made that decision yet. So I am talking and thinking about that currently. I will probably let people know in the upcoming weeks or months. But at the moment, I'm doing everything I can outside of that campaign to move the conversation forward about this. But I appreciate your interest in asking about that. So as I said earlier, I'm enjoying a great second cup of coffee I got from Ebenezer's Coffee House this morning. And it's good to have you all here. The last thing I want to highlight for you is this another story that I read in Native News Online this morning about living generously. It was written by Cheryl Crazy Bull, and it's about how her family instilled the value of generosity in her and how she is using that both personally and professionally today. And this is something that I love to see stories like this. Especially coming from a Native community, I know how vitally important the value of being generous is and how that is passed down from generation to generation. In our Navajo culture, we have what's called a laughing party, where when the child makes their first audible laugh, not a coo, not a burp, but an audible laugh. The first time they laugh, you throw a laughing party for your child. You invite friends, you invite family, you have this massive feast. And at the party, the child is given gifts by the person who made them laugh and other family members, but the gifts aren't for the child. They're for the child to give away to everyone who comes to the party. One of the purposes of the laughing party is to teach the child to be generous, to instill that value of generosity into even their earliest of memories, so that they will grow up to be generous people. I didn't have a laughing party. My parents did not adhere to the traditional values in that, and so I did not have a laughing party. My father, my mother still did work hard to instill a value of generosity in me, but because of the boarding schools, that tradition wasn't passed down to me. But we did have it for our kids. And I actually wrote about this. I wrote about my son's laughing party, and I'm going to share that with you. I do some consulting for the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship, and this is one of the few things I've had that literally went viral. So this article that I'm sharing with you right now, which is on the website at Calvin Institute of Christian Worship's website, I got a call. I published this years ago. I forget, 7 or 8 years ago. And I got a call from Calvin one day, and someone said to me on the other end of the line, they said, "Mark, did you know that your article about a laughing party is trending on Reddit?" This was 7 or 8 years ago. I had no clue what Reddit was. I'm like, what's Reddit? What does it mean it's trending on Reddit? So I went to the Reddit website, I looked at it, and someone had shared my article on Reddit, and it was getting a bunch of votes, and it was kind of having a brief moment in the limelight, if you will. And it was getting commented on, it was getting shared and getting posted. And I got a call back later from Calvin that day, and they said actually it got so much attention from Reddit, it crashed the Calvin University's web servers. And so that's one of my claim to fame is I had an article that actually crashed the Kelvin's web servers because of all the hits it was getting. But anyway, you can read that story. These are things that are important, right? Teaching generosity. And I'm just going to share with you a few things that I do to keep that value of generosity in my heart. Every week I go to the ATM and I get out a few fives and a bunch of ones. And I carry those bills with me in my wallet. And as I'm walking around town, as I'm driving at corners, right, frequently you meet people who are asking for money and who are looking for help. And right, it's nearly impossible to discern who you should and who you shouldn't help. I know there are legitimate people who need resources like that and are desperate and being asking that way. And there are others who are probably not going to use the money for anything productive. They may use it to feed an addiction that they're struggling with. And so you'll get a lot of opinions on both sides of do you or do you not give money in those situations. And I've tried both sides, right? And I've decided that I carry these bills with me and I usually pass them out. I usually will give almost anyone who asks $2, regardless of who they are or what I think of them. And I do it even though I know there's a good chance the money may not be used for something healthy or productive. But I do it because I learned when I don't do that and I leave it to myself to discern, is this person going to be a good steward of this little thing or are they not? I frequently will end up saying no, and then I will not give them money, and then I will just walk by them and not even interact with them. And I notice that when I start doing that too much, I become oblivious to people who are in need around me. And so by even just stopping and giving someone $2, even though 90% of the time it doesn't turn into any sort of real conversation, and 99% of the time I never talk with them again. But it has allowed me to develop a couple relationships, people who I know today, and I see today who I recognize, I talk to, I see them because I took 5 seconds to stop and not preach at them, not offer advice, but just said, here's a couple bucks. And it opens up even just the smallest crack for relationship or potential relationship, either in that moment or in the future. And so that's why I do it. It keeps my heart generous. I learned when I don't do something like that, it causes my heart to become very judgmental, and I began to close off walls, because if I'm going to walk by someone, I need to justify why I'm walking by them, right? If I see need in front of me and I don't do anything to help it, I have to somehow justify it. And so if I start doing that too frequently, then I just become oblivious to it. And so I decided if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of generosity. The other thing that I do fairly frequently is, and my wife will attest to this, is I have given away a large number of jackets, especially during the winter when I'm out and I'm in the cold, or I'm driving in the car and we see someone on the side of the road or at a corner asking for money or asking for help. Like, it's not uncommon for me to stop and give them my jacket. I can't even tell you how many jackets I've given away in that way. And I do that, right, because I'm in a warm car, or I'm not too far from my home or something else, and I have a jacket and they have none, and I have a home to go home to, and they are out in the cold. And so I've gotten in the pattern of not getting emotionally connected to any of my jackets. And I'm like, yeah, if I'm wearing it and I see someone who is in greater need of a jacket than I am at that moment, I will be fairly quick to take the jacket off and give it to them. And again, these are things that are taught in things like the Laughing Party. These are values that are passed down, that especially in our traditional communities, that are held deeply, that are instilled. And it's not just about, are you or are you not a generous person? It's about having the value for generosity and then practicing that value and finding, what can I do to keep this value of generosity alive in me, and even model it for my children or for other people around me, and for things that happen. And so when I saw that article this morning, I encourage you to read it. It's Native News Online, Living Generously, How Values Guide Us, by Cheryl Crazy Bull. And I deeply appreciate her writing that article. It reminded me of these stories I shared with you. And I want to encourage you, as you go through your day-to-day, to look for opportunities to be generous, and look for, what can you do, what do you need to do to practice generosity. And again, like I said, I found I can be most generous when I'm able to keep the door open for communication and relationship. When I just get used to driving by people or walking by people without noticing, or without stopping because of their need, then I tend to close myself off more. So that's one of the things that I found. But anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope this is some good things to think about and to ponder. I want to thank you for joining me this morning. Let me see who's on. Nina Yate, thank you for joining me. Julia Yate, thank you for being here. Terry Yate, good to see you. Thank you for commenting. For everyone who's been commenting on this, I want to encourage everyone to, if you're able to, even after this live stream is over, if you can like it on YouTube, or like it on Facebook, that'll help the algorithm. It'll help to leave a comment, or even just a word of encouragement on it, to help get it more in the algorithm of these different social media groups. If you are interested in going deeper into some of the work I'm doing, and even helping to support the work that I'm doing, I'm going to share with you a link to my site on Patreon. And if you are interested in purchasing, or even giving as a gift, the book I wrote, Unsettling Truths, I'm going to give the link to my website, where you can purchase signed copies of Unsettling Truths. And I'm going to give you a little hint right now. I had a special running through the end of the year, actually through Monday, of not charging any shipping, and I haven't taken that off yet. So if you order it today, I'll probably take it off this evening. So if you order the book today, you will still get free shipping on us when you purchase a signed copy of Unsettling Truths. But anyway, just a little tip there. Anyway, my relatives, I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. I hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy the beauty that surrounds us. And may we all learn how to walk in this beauty together. Echat and Hakonet.